I never thought a lottery ticket, a heartbreak, and a single mother with 2 kids would completely rewrite my life. But sometimes, the most unexpected moments lead to the love and second chance you didn't know you were searching for. I grew up in a small, sleepy town where life felt predictable, and everybody seemed to know everybody. My parents ran a humble hardware store that served as more than just a place to shop, it was the town's gathering spot. My dad instilled in me the value of hard work, while my mom constantly reminded me of the importance of showing kindness, even when life threw challenges our way. Despite their contrasting personalities, they worked together effortlessly, a true partnership I always hoped to replicate in my own life someday. In high school, I was the reserved type, the kid who found more comfort in the pages of a book than in the chaos of a crowd. My first love was Emily, a girl with an unforgettable laugh and a passion for painting that could light up any room. We spent our senior year planning a future together, but those dreams didn't come to fruition. Emily moved away to attend art school, and I stayed behind, feeling the heavy pull of responsibility to help my parents run the store. College was a whirlwind of lectures, late nights, and part-time jobs. It was during this time that I met Lila. She was a determined journalism student with big aspirations and a quick wit that could stop you in your tracks. Lila had this incredible energy about her, the kind that made you believe anything was achievable if you just reached for it. We fell hard for each other, and before we knew it, we were married right after graduation. Those early years of marriage felt like a dream. We'd stay up talking about the future, sharing our hopes and fears in the glow of late-night conversations. Our weekends were filled with small adventures, little escapes that felt like stolen moments in time. But as the years passed, things began to shift. My job as a traveling technician left me physically and emotionally drained, while Lila's career began to soar, demanding more and more of her attention and energy. What once felt like a shared dream started to unravel into unspoken frustrations and unmet expectations. By the time Lila asked for a divorce, it felt like we were already strangers, tied together only by the weight of our shared memories. I'll never forget the day she walked out. I sank into my recliner, numb, as my wife of 6 years quietly packed her things. I knew she'd soon become my ex-wife, but the reality of it didn't seem to fully sink in. My emotions felt distant, like they weren't even mine. That morning, she'd asked me to come home early, saying we needed to talk. I should have known something was off. When I walked through the door, the absence of dinner, an unspoken ritual of ours, hinted that this conversation wouldn't be ordinary. When Lila sat me down, there was no sugarcoating. Her expression was tense, her words direct, cutting straight to the heart of what had gone wrong between us. When we got married, she began, I really believed we'd have a good life. But these past 4 years, they've shown me that this isn't what I want anymore. You're never home, and when you are, you're too tired to notice me. Hearing those words hit me harder than I expected. She was right. I hadn't been there, not in the way she needed me to be. Still, sitting there, all I could feel was a tangled mess of guilt, sadness, and disbelief. How had we ended up here? What happened to the couple who once dreamed of conquering the world together? I tried to reason with her, my voice steady but my emotions swirling beneath the surface. Lila, I work these long hours to keep the bills paid. You work too, but it's not enough to cover everything. If you'd contribute more, I could ask my boss to keep me in town. Her eyes flashed with frustration as she cut me off. That's not the only problem, Oliver. You don't even take care of the backyard you insisted on having. We could hire someone, I suggested, trying to keep calm, and then we'd have more time to spend together. She scoffed, her voice rising. With what money, Oliver? Everything stretched thin as it is. Her words sliced through the air, each one landing harder than the last. It's not getting better. I'm tired of waiting around. I want excitement, and you're not giving me that. I'm done. I held her gaze, her words echoing in my head as I tried to process the finality of it all. So, a divorce? I asked, my voice betraying none of the turmoil I felt inside. 6 months, she replied firmly, her tone devoid of hesitation. 6 months, and we'll both be free. Who's paying for it? I asked, still trying to wrap my mind around what was happening. I will, she answered without skipping a beat. I nodded, the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders. That's fair, I said quietly. Do it. She grabbed her coat and paused by the door, as if she had one last thing to say. But she didn't. Instead, she left, the sound of the door closing behind her ringing in my ears. I sat there, staring at the empty space she left behind, trying to untangle the mess of emotions swirling inside me. I thought about what I'd miss. She could be demanding, self-centered even, but she was still someone to come home to. Did I still love her? I wasn't sure. Not once during that entire conversation had either of us uttered the word love. That, I realized, was the saddest part of all. Later that evening, I found myself at Miles's bar, a familiar spot I hadn't visited in a couple of weeks. Lila's decision stung, but I told myself I'd move past it. At the bar, I decided to shake things up a bit and bought a $5 scratch ticket instead of my usual singles. Feeling bold, I also grabbed tickets for the state lottery and Powerball. Cheap fool, Miles teased from behind the counter. You'll never win big with those scratch-offs. Go for the real money. Let the machine pick, I replied with a smirk. It's smarter than me anyway. I grabbed some peanuts and asked the waitress to move my beer to a booth, a ridiculous rule about not carrying your own drink that I always found annoying. Before long, my friends Elliot and Anna Reed joined me. We talked, laughed, and I nursed another beer. But as the night wore on, hunger got the better of me. I left for a steakhouse nearby, where I ordered the smallest steak on the menu and paired it with another beer. No dessert, just one last drink to cap off the night. I knew I was pushing my limit, so I made a mental note to drive carefully on the way home. Bitter thoughts crept in as I drove. It wasn't a home anymore, just an empty house. Lila had made it clear she wasn't coming back, unless she changed her mind, which didn't seem likely. Maybe she went to her sister Brenda's house. Brenda had always treated me better than Lila did, though that didn't matter now. I felt myself getting maudlin and told myself it was time to get home and sleep. Once home, I didn't stop moving, except for a quick bathroom break. I undressed mechanically, slipping the lottery tickets into my wallet before sitting on the edge of the bed. One of the scratch tickets caught my eye, and on a whim, I decided to scratch it off. My heart raced as I revealed 3 matching cows, $110,000. Another cow brought the total to $155,000. My hands shook as I scratched the final section, revealing a $25,000 emblem. I burst into laughter, the sound breaking the silence of the empty house. $180,000, I whispered to myself, still grinning from ear to ear. Take that, Lila. Pay for your own divorce. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I'd caught a break. Still laughing, I fell back onto the bed, grinning at the absurdity of it all. I locked the bedroom door and collapsed onto the guest bed, exhaustion weighing me down. Lila's words echoed in my mind, her tone so firm it left no room for hope. If you can keep the house, go ahead, she'd said earlier. I just need a list of assets for my lawyer. I don't care about much, I just want to move on. Fine, I'd replied with a heavy sigh, the fight draining out of me. Send the papers, and I'll sign them. But I think you're making a mistake. We could have worked this out. She didn't hesitate. No, Oliver. I've fallen out of love. I need to start over. Before I could stop myself, the question slipped out. Is there someone else? Her pause was telling, but she eventually shook her head. No. But there might be before this is over. I didn't push her on it, though the words stung more than I cared to admit. She'd made up her mind, and there was no point in pretending otherwise. After she left, I went upstairs to see what she'd taken. The bedroom was barren. The king-size bed, dressers, nightstands, and even the lamps were gone. She hadn't left a thing behind. It felt final. Like a line had been drawn between our shared life and the one she was starting without me. At least she'd been considerate enough to organize the guest room for me. I found my clothes neatly folded in the dresser, my suits hung carefully in the closet. On the nightstand sat a note from Lila. Her handwriting was familiar, the words curt but polite. Oliver. I hope this arrangement works for you. I've moved into an apartment and didn't want to spend much on furniture, so I took what I needed. I wish you all the best. I stared at the note for a while, then set it aside. The house already felt emptier without her. The backyard, once full of flower beds she insisted on planting, now felt like a chore waiting to be dealt with. One day, I'd tear out those beds and replace them with grass. A bigger mower could make quick work of it. But not today. That evening, I went out for dinner alone. As I sat at my table, I found myself people watching. Couples around me were at various stages of their relationships, some lost in love, others visibly tense. Families were wrangling children, some well-behaved, others causing a scene. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of parents Lila and I might have been if we'd ever started a family. After dinner, I stopped by Miles's bar. I ordered a beer and picked up a few more scratch tickets. Most of the regulars seemed unaware that Lila was gone, and a few stopped to chat, but no one mentioned her absence. Later, I returned for another Powerball ticket. Miles greeted me with his usual smirk. Still no winners, he said, shaking his head. The prize is getting serious. Same numbers, I replied, adding a scratch ticket to my purchase. I scratched it at the bar and won $10. Are you actually ahead on these tickets? Miles asked, raising an eyebrow. I am, actually, I said with a grin. But I'm waiting until the divorce is final before I let anyone know how far ahead I really am. Miles chuckled. Smart. No point risking it. Lila wasn't the type to stir up trouble, but I figured it was better to be cautious. Friday and Saturday passed in a blur of quiet routines, and on Sunday, I got a call from my sister, inviting me over. Come by and see the kids, she said warmly. They miss you. Oh, and don't forget bread and beer for the chop suey on Thursday. Deal, I said, laughing for the first time in days. By Monday morning, I was on a plane for work. On Tuesday, I learned the state lottery had been won, not by me, unfortunately. But the Powerball jackpot had climbed to over $150 million. I knew Miles would be thrilled to keep selling me tickets regardless of my odds. By Thursday evening, I was back at Miles's, ready to try my luck again. If nothing else, the tickets gave me something to look forward to, even if the real prize was just finding a way to move forward. I joined Brenda and her family for dinner that evening, and to my surprise, Lila was there too. We exchanged polite updates about our lives, both of us keeping things light and impersonal. Brenda's kids, however, were thrilled to see me, throwing themselves at me with hugs and chattering about their latest adventures. It was a brief reminder of the warmth I'd once imagined in my own home, though I quickly pushed that thought aside. The next day, I stopped by Miles's bar for a drink, as usual. You know, Eva Brown will be here tomorrow night, Miles said, sliding my beer across the counter. If you're okay with it. I'm managing fine, I replied, brushing off the suggestion. But I'll think about it. Miles leaned in, undeterred. She's had some bad luck, you know. A war widow with 2 kids, and she's being evicted next week. The poor woman needs a break. Curious despite myself, I asked, how old is she? 25, Miles replied. She used to be so cheerful, but life's been rough on her. Her husband died in the service, and her parents are barely scraping by to help. She just needs a chance. I sighed, the weight of her story settling on me. Oliver Grant, a voice called from behind me, interrupting my thoughts. I turned to see a young woman standing near the door. Eva Brown? I asked, rising to my feet. I'm Oliver. Let me grab a booth for us. Sure, she said, nodding politely. I gestured to the bartender to bring my beer over and refill her glass, then led her to a corner booth. So, I began, leaning back. Knowing Miles, I bet his description of me was far from accurate. Eva let out a soft laugh. He said you were the most handsome man I'd ever meet, that your wife left you, and that you were heartbroken. He thought my kids and I could save you from despair. She shook her head, amused. Classic Miles. I chuckled. That sounds about right. He always knows how to spin a story. As we talked, I noticed her ease. She wasn't trying to impress me, and there was something refreshing about her openness. At one point, I caught myself glancing at her, and she noticed, smiling knowingly. I don't have much of a figure, she said without a hint of embarrassment. I eat a lot, but I've got a high metabolism. Cooking is just my way of indulging my appetite. I grinned. Then let's skip the small talk and head to McDonald's. I haven't eaten yet, and I'd like to meet your kids. After dinner, I drove Eva and her kids back to my house. As we walked around, she admired the flower beds Lila had once insisted on planting. She even stopped to pull a weed, laughing softly as she did. You've got a nice place, she said, glancing around. Thanks, I replied, explaining my usual travel schedule of 3 days a week for work. I hesitated, realizing how much of my marriage had revolved around that schedule. It didn't work out so well for my. Let's change the subject, Eva interrupted gently. This is already outside my comfort zone. Fair enough, I said, smiling. As we stood in the yard, Eva introduced me to her kids. Her daughter, Teresa, immediately charmed me with her energy and wit. Eva smiled, explaining, we call her Tinkerbell. It just fits. And it did. Teresa had an undeniable spark, a confidence that her mother seemed to lack, though Eva's quiet strength was appealing in its own way. Later that night, I stopped by Miles's again around 10:30. Give me a scratch ticket, I said, grinning. Let's see if Eva Brown brings me some luck. Miles laughed and handed me one. What are you drinking? He asked. Genesee Light, I replied, trying something new. Sweet, but not bad. The next day, I visited Eva's home for dinner. The table was set with beautiful floral dishes I didn't recognize. Where did these come from? I asked curiously. A wedding gift, she replied quietly, her tone steady but tinged with emotion. I barely used them. My husband's gone now, and the meaning went with him. It's time to move on. These will be our everyday dishes now. I nodded, taking in the moment. They're beautiful, I said softly. She smiled faintly. Thank you. Something about her resilience struck a chord in me. Maybe, just maybe, we were both trying to find our way back to a sense of home. I admired the table arrangement, noting how the flowers from the backyard added a vibrant touch. These look great, I said, gesturing to them. Eva replied with a small smile. I thought they'd brighten the place up a bit. After dinner, the kids excitedly brought out an old photo album, flipping through pages with wide-eyed curiosity. As they turned the pages, Tinkerbell paused, her gaze shifting between the pictures and her mom. She pointed to one photo with a questioning look. Who's this with the kids? That's my sister-in-law, Brenda, and her family, I explained. They visit often, so you'll have plenty of playmates. I smiled. Brenda's a fantastic cook, just like your mom. Eva laughed softly. Lila wasn't much into cooking, I admitted. Tonight's meal was one of the best I've ever had. After dinner, while the kids watched TV, I helped Eva clear the table. We worked side by side in comfortable silence, the kind that comes naturally when two people share the same unspoken rhythm. Later that evening, we headed to the bank, where I added Eva's name to my credit card account. The card had an $11,000 limit, which I always paid off in full. New cards, issued in both our names, were set to arrive soon. As we walked outside, Eva looked at me, her expression a mix of surprise and uncertainty. "Why did you do that?" she asked. I was expecting something like a $700 limit, not this. "What happens if the basement floods, the furnace breaks, or you need a motel while I'm away?" I said, meeting her eyes. "This is my house, and I'm responsible for everything in it, including you and the kids. End of discussion." She nodded, softened by my words but still processing the gesture. Later, we stopped by Miles's bar. He greeted us with his usual mock exasperation. "Christ, Oliver. I never see you anymore. What can I get you?" "A beer for me," I said, glancing at Eva. "And a red wine spritzer for her, half wine, half ginger ale." Eva smiled. "Okay, I trust you're not trying to get me drunk, yet." Miles smirked, sliding the drinks our way. "Give him time," he quipped. I scratched off a lottery ticket on a whim and won $5, just enough to cover our drinks. Miles groaned dramatically. "You're going to break me, Oliver." Afterward, we visited Eva's parents, a warm and welcoming couple in their 50s. Her dad, tall and slim like Eva, greeted me with a firm handshake. Her mom was kind and curious, though I caught her giving me a look that I couldn't quite interpret. Was she unsure about me? Or maybe she was hoping for something more? I couldn't tell. The first part of the week was peaceful. I was home every evening, and dinner was always ready when I arrived. The kids were ecstatic about the new swing set and jungle gym in the backyard. Every night, they dragged me outside, insisting I watch them play. The yard was immaculate, the lawn freshly mowed, the flower beds neat and full of life. "You've done a lot," I remarked to Eva, genuinely impressed. "I have the time now," she said simply, brushing a stray hair from her face. Later in the week, a sleek Mercedes pulled up outside the house. A tall, sharply dressed man stepped out, carrying himself with a confidence that immediately caught my attention. Eva looked flustered as she walked out to greet him. "Oliver, this is Richard Tromley, my boss," she said, her tone polite but slightly hurried. "He's been very kind to me, and, well, he occasionally asks me out." "Oliver Grant," I said, extending my hand. He shook it firmly, offering a polite nod. Eva turned to me briefly. "The kids need to be in bed on time. I might be late, so don't wait up." "Bye," she said quickly, before climbing into the Mercedes with Richard. As they drove away, a wave of jealousy and hurt hit me unexpectedly. It was sharp, unwelcome, and entirely unfamiliar. Not even Lila's outings had made me feel this way. I stood there, staring at the car until it disappeared down the street, wrestling with emotions I wasn't ready to name. I kept reminding myself that Eva was just my housekeeper, nothing more. But moments like these blurred the lines in ways I couldn't ignore. That evening, as I tucked the kids into bed, Tinkerbell looked up at me with those wide, honest eyes. "Oliver," she said sweetly, "my friend says her daddy kisses her goodnight. Mommy kisses me, but she says nobody kisses her. I think she'd like it if you kissed her too." I smiled, feeling a tug at my heart. "Maybe, sweetheart. Sleep tight." I kissed her forehead, and she grinned before closing her eyes. Downstairs, I waited for Eva to return, but as midnight came and went, I gave up and headed to bed. She finally came in at 1:30 a.m., but I stayed in my room, my thoughts spiraling. Was she making out with him? Did they go to a motel? I told myself it wasn't my business, but the questions gnawed at me anyway. The next morning, I grabbed breakfast at IHOP to clear my head. When I returned home, Eva was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and looking well rested. "Sorry about last night," she said. "The meeting ran late, and I didn't get home until after midnight. I should have called, but I knew you and the kids were fine." Relief and frustration washed over me at once. "You didn't say it was a meeting. I thought it was a date with your boss." Eva frowned, caught off guard. "You thought that? Why?" "Because all you said was, a date. Then you got dressed up, left with a guy in a fancy car, and said you'd be home by 11. But you didn't get back until 1:30, I explained. Next time, just give me more details so I don't worry." Her expression softened. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "I was so excited about the meeting, I didn't think to explain." Life settled into a routine again after that, though the house often felt quieter when the kids weren't around. Sometimes it was just me and Eva greeting each other in the evenings. One day, I bumped into Lila at the grocery store. What started as a quick hello turned into an hour-long conversation. Eventually, she got to the point. "Oliver," she said candidly, "I moved out almost 3 months ago, and I'm happy. I've met someone, and we're thinking about moving in together. Is that going to bother you?" "Not at all," I replied with a shrug. "My life's pretty settled. You're probably getting more sleep than I am, but other than that, I'm good." Lila laughed, shaking her head. "You always had a way of brushing things off." Later that evening, I stopped by Miles's bar and bought another scratch ticket. For the first time in a while, I didn't win a dime. "Has my luck finally run out?" I muttered, tossing the ticket aside. Miles wandered over, laughing. "All downhill from here, Oliver. How much have you won lately?" "At least $2,000 over the last few months," I said with a grin. "Maybe more. I'll figure it out at tax time." "Fool," Miles teased. "I wouldn't declare it at all." I laughed. "Oops, forget I said that." Miles smirked. "Go home and tell Eva you're losing your streak. And while you're at it, when are you going to get in bed with her? She needs it as much as you do." I chuckled awkwardly but said nothing, heading home with his words echoing in my mind. That night, as the kids slept soundly upstairs, Eva and I found ourselves alone in the living room. The moment overtook us, and before we knew it, we ended up in her bed. I woke the next morning feeling happier than I had in years. In the kitchen, I made coffee, and Eva joined me, sinking into a chair with a small smile. "Me too, please," she said, pointing to the coffee pot. After a pause, she looked up at me hesitantly. "Do you love me?" "I know what you said last night, but it's morning now." "I do," I said softly. "I love you, Eva. I love the kids. And I love having you here." I meant every word, and she could see it. She smiled, her eyes softening. "Thank you. You've made us so happy, Oliver. Do you want me to pick up the kids this morning?" I offered. "No, I'll go," she replied, still smiling. And with that, I realized we were building something real, something worth holding on to. "I want to tell Mom about last night," Eva said, her smile brimming with confidence. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Absolutely," she replied with a light laugh, grabbing her keys and heading out the door. After she left, I poured myself another cup of coffee and flipped on the TV. A news report immediately caught my attention. Miles's bar had sold one of the 2 winning tickets for the $3.2 million state lottery. Each winner was set to receive $1.6 million. My heart raced as I let the news sink in. Later that day, I headed to Miles's. The bar was packed, buzzing with excitement. As soon as he spotted me, Miles broke into a wide grin. "Oliver. You've put my place on the map. This is the biggest payout the city's ever seen, and I sold one of the tickets. Everyone's talking about it." I leaned in closer, keeping my voice low. Do you have to tell anyone who won? I don't want to claim it until after the first of the year, for tax reasons. Miles nodded knowingly. No worries, Oliver. I get a bonus for selling the ticket, so I'm more than happy to keep my mouth shut. But people are going to speculate. He paused, studying my face. Does Eva know? No, and don't tell her, I said firmly. I want to keep this quiet for now. Miles raised his hands in mock surrender. Your secret's safe with me, but good luck keeping this under wraps. Everyone's buzzing about it. Life went on, and things with Eva only grew stronger. One evening, I ran into Lila again, this time at a coffee shop. We exchanged pleasantries before she smiled slyly. Honestly, I wouldn't have imagined you and Eva as a couple, but you both seem happy. Is it serious? It is, I replied, the words coming easily. Living in the city and coming home to her every night brought us closer. Lila nodded, a genuine smile crossing her face. I get it. And I'm happy for you, Oliver. For what it's worth, Thomas and I are doing great too. Good for you, I said, returning her smile. I'm glad everything worked out. All right, she teased, that earns you an invite to our wedding. Things were stable until a work trip threw a wrench into everything. My secretary, Vivian, a strikingly attractive and undeniably flirtatious woman, was required to join me. I tried to keep things professional, but her behavior made Eva uneasy when I returned home. One evening, after dinner, Eva quietly confronted me. Oliver, what's going on with Vivian? I need the truth. Nothing happened, I assured her. I promise. But let me tell you something about Vivian. She flirts, and there's a reason for it. Eva's brow furrowed. What are you trying to say? I hesitated before responding. Vivian's insecure, Eva. That's why she acts the way she does. She tries to cover it up, but it's obvious. Eva let out a soft chuckle, relaxing slightly. I guess I can understand that. I won't let jealousy get the better of me again. I smiled, reaching for her hand. Good, because I plan to spend the night right here with you. Set your alarm, tomorrow's a new day. As the weeks passed, we started planning our wedding. We settled on the last Saturday in November, a cozy 10 a.m. ceremony at Miles's bar. Ever generous, Miles let us use the space for the reception until 4 p.m. Brenda was my matron of honor, with Tinkerbell and Pearl serving as her attendants. At the reception, the band struck up a waltz, and as I returned from the restroom, Vivian intercepted me with her signature mischievous grin. Oliver, she said, slightly tipsy, dance with me. I need your advice. Reluctantly, I led her onto the dance floor. She leaned heavily on me, unsteady on her feet as we moved to the music. What's on your mind, Vivian? I asked. She smiled faintly, hesitating before speaking. Whatever was coming next, I braced myself for it. As the wedding reception buzzed on, Vivian suddenly blurted out, Sophie thinks it's time for me to come out. She wants me to make it public. Caught off guard but supportive, I asked, would it ruin the wedding if you used a toast to make the announcement? Not at all, I assured her with a warm smile. Relieved, Vivian hugged me tightly, standing on her toes to kiss my cheek. Eva joined in, embracing Vivian as well, showing her support. Soon, Sophie and Vivian stood together, beaming as a line of well-wishers formed to congratulate them. The room was filled with warm words and laughter, a moment of joy shared by everyone. Later that evening, after a few more dances, I turned to Eva and said, time to wrap this up. We've got 6 whole days of honeymoon ahead. Before we left, Lila approached Eva, the two sharing a brief but warm exchange. Then she turned to me with a playful smile. One last dance, ex-husband. Why not? I replied with a grin. We swayed to the music, the past feeling lighter than ever. As Sophie and Vivian adjusted to their new openness, they spent a lot of time with Eva, which initially made her uneasy. "They seem a bit intense," Eva admitted one night. "They're just adjusting," I reassured her. "Being open about their relationship is new for them, and they're leaning on us for support. Once they settle in, things will change." Eva seemed relieved and nodded. "You're probably right." One evening, as we relaxed on the couch, I decided it was time to share something I'd kept to myself for too long. Taking her hand, I said, "Eva, there's something I need to tell you. You've been managing our finances since we got married, but I haven't been completely transparent." She gave me a curious look. "What do you mean?" "I won the lottery," I admitted, watching her reaction carefully. "A pretty significant amount, $225,000. Her eyes widened. "What? When?" "Months ago. I didn't cash it, though, it's still sitting in the safe. The ticket expires in 2 months, and I wanted to tell you now so we could decide what to do together." Eva tilted her head, processing the information. "Do you want Lila to know it's from you?" she asked thoughtfully. "Not at all," I replied firmly. "That's why I'm giving it to you. You decide what to do with it." She smiled warmly, her expression softening. "Go get it, and grab 5 fresh tickets from Miles. I'll put it all in an envelope for the baby shower. Lila will never suspect." The baby shower was a huge success. That evening, Eva returned home glowing. "Lila cried," she said with a smile. At first, she didn't understand the gift, but once it clicked, it meant the world to her. Life, with all its unexpected twists and turns, was settling into something beautiful. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be.